Hey guys, welcome to the 5th episode of my KISSTORY series, my overly ambitious series on the history of my favorite rock band, Kiss. I've done 4 videos on this already. This is episode 5, and today I'll be covering what could arguably be considered their biggest year in terms of popularity. We're going into 1977. When that year started, Kiss was on a winter tour for their 5th studio album, Rock and Roll Over, and it was going very well as they trekked across North America. That tour included, for the 2nd year in a row, Kiss playing 3 sold-out shows at Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan, which was one of their biggest markets, of course. But probably the highlight of that tour took place on February 18th, when Kiss, which, bear in mind, was a totally New York band, headlined Madison Square Garden for the first time. This was a major personal and professional milestone for that band. That's something they'd always wanted to do, and they finally got the opportunity, and I believe they sold it out, and I know they professionally videotaped the concert for posterity, and yeah, just one of the most iconic events in Kiss history. Legend has it that Ace Frehley was too drunk to do sound check that night, but was able to pull it together for the performance. But anyway, it was probably their biggest tour of North America that they'd ever done. In terms of being a band that sold singles and sold albums, they were doing a lot better on the albums front. They were finally starting to make some really decent money from the sales of their albums, but they were never, you know, that band that issued hit singles. I mean, they'd had a few hits recently. They'd had Rock and Roll All Night in 1975. In 1976, they had a big hit with the song Beth, and Beth was certainly still riding in popularity in the early half of 1977. And but they put out a lot of other songs like Shout It Out Loud, like Calling Dr. Love, which, although they are classics, were not really the chart super hits at the time. But again, what really drew people in was Kiss's concerts. Kiss has always been renowned as a live band, and so despite the fact that they never in their entire history actually had a #1 single, they still were able to rake it in with live performances. And come April, they found a totally new market that they had not saturated yet, and that was Japan. Kiss at that time was a little bit hesitant to go out and do an overseas tour. As I mentioned in my last video, in the spring of '76, they had toured Europe, and it had been kind of a disaster. It had them playing in much smaller venues than they were used to in America, and it was logistically very difficult. So they really didn't want to go overseas again, but they found out they had an enormous fan base in Japan, so it would be silly not to tour. So they did. And unlike their previous European tour, their Japanese tour was a resounding success. For that leg of the tour, they debuted a brand new, huge stage. The biggest change to this stage was that they had always had a staircase on stage that they would run down at the top of the show at the beginning of Detroit Rock City. But now they had replaced that small little staircase on stage with a big giant one that lit up in cool patterns, and just made the show twice as big. If you just take a look at this stage, it was unlike anything they'd ever done before. That stage would later be refined for Kiss's next tour in the summer, but would go on to be known by most of the Kiss Army as one of their greatest stages they've ever come up with. Another cool thing about that one was during Peter Criss's drum solo, that his drum riser would push towards the audience, and they would get a really cool close-up view of it. This Japanese tour was more than successful. I mean, Kiss played 4 sold-out shows at Budokan Hall in Tokyo, among other dates, and those gigs set a new attendance record for Budokan Hall that had previously been set by a little band called the Beatles. So there's that. That Japanese tour wound up being the end of the Rock and Roll Over tour, and after that, Kiss went into the studios for yet another studio album. That was the thing in the 70s. Bands put out 1, maybe 2 albums every year back then. And Kiss was no different, because in 1977 they put out their 6th studio album, 7th overall release in 3.5 years, and that was Love Gun. When this album originally came out, it came with a little assemble it yourself gun prop kit. I don't know, I guess it was cool for I say cool for kids, but I mean it was a gun. So yeah, it's also got the really cool sleeve and custom center ring label that Casablanca had made for them. They were pretty much Casablanca's flagship group at that point. I mean, they also had Parliament. Actually, that's not true. They had Donna Summer. Donna Summer was pretty enormous for them around that time. But, yeah, so Love Gun came out, and then Kiss spent most of the summer touring in the States. Like I said, making their stage setup even greater, just putting on probably the coolest show they ever did. When that tour wrapped up in September, Kiss was getting pretty tired. I mean, they'd pretty much been on the road for 3 or 4 years straight. So instead of making a whole another second studio album for 1977, they took some live recordings, some sound check recordings, and probably a lot of new recordings, and made Kiss Alive 2. One thing they did do was write and record 5 brand new songs for this album. I should say 4 songs, because one of them is a cover of Any Way You Want It, which I believe is an old Dave Clark 5 song. But this is a sequel to Kiss Alive, and being that they wanted it to be a sequel, look at this. I mean, this is the greatest gatefold of all time. Anyway, they, looking to make it a sequel to the first Kiss Alive album, they chose not to reuse any material, which meant they only included songs from their last 3 albums, Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and Love Gun. And, which meant they didn't quite have enough material to fit all 4 sides of the album, so they did throw on 5 new songs for side 4, although they never did seem to ever get around to playing those songs live. I know they did here and there, but those songs seem to be forgotten by the band, at least as far as their live shows go. And then once again, for the winter of 1977-78, Kiss did what they did best and toured the U.S. They just never stopped. There was still a market for it, and that's why they did it. By the end of 1977, Kiss was not only one of the most enormous concert draws in America, but the merchandising was insane. I guess the Beatles and Elvis had a lot of merchandising in the 50s and 60s, but in the 70s, rock and roll merchandise was off the chain. I mean, everyone had rock and roll t-shirts back then, and Kiss was really on top of that market. You could get the Kiss radio. You could get the Kiss Your Face makeup kit. You could get dolls. You could get, just lunch boxes, toy cars. Anything you wanted if you were a kid or a teenager, you could probably get it with the Kiss logo slapped on it, and that remains true today. And that remains one of the ways that a band that, like I said, didn't have a million hit singles was able to make an exorbitant amount of money. So by the end of 1977, Kiss riding high, and I'm going to be getting into in the next couple videos of this series their dramatic fall from the top. Spoiler alert. When a band reaches its peak, there's only one way for them to go, and that's down. And starting in 1978, more so in 1979, 1980, the Kiss bubble will begin to burst through a combination of changing public tastes and a rather hilarious series of questionable decision-making by Kiss themselves and their management, and all involved. So I'm actually really excited for the next few videos, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That'll just about cover it for what Kiss was doing around 1977. Just going nuts with touring, and that's another thing worth noting for the upcoming videos, is they were getting tired of touring. They've been touring from March of 1974 to now we're getting into 1978, virtually nonstop. I myself am a touring musician, and I know that must have been impossible for them. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode. Tomorrow we're going to get into or not tomorrow. I'm not going to do a new video on this every day, but I do this series. I try to get a video made about this every couple of weeks. So in my next episode, 1978, we're going to start covering a very interesting time in Kiss's history. I'm very excited for that. Thank you for watching. Check out the description for a full list of all my upcoming concert dates. As I mentioned, once again, I am a musician. Yay. Also in the description are links to where you can find my music, where it's sold or streamed online. Yeah, like this video if you liked what you saw. Subscribe to my channel if you've been enjoying all of my videos, and you can even ring the notification bell if you want to be notified every time I upload a new video, which should be tomorrow and most days for the foreseeable future. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you with another new episode again tomorrow. See you then.